Well, we're in chapter 24 of the book of Job, and Job is continuing his reply to Eliphaz. And Job says, I just compare the righteous versus the wicked. And the more I look at it, the more I'm convinced that there's no immediate justice for either the righteous or the unrighteous. In chapter 25, and he goes on and says, and prove me to be a liar. You guys fear man, but you don't fear God. Chapter 25, Bildad speaks. Now this is Bildad's third speech to Job. It's either the shortest speech that Bildad has made, or Job cut him off before he had a chance to finish what he had to say. Nevertheless, all we have recorded is a very short section. And it says that basically Bildad is saying, the greatness of God, can any man stand before him, just or unjust? How can he stand before him if he's born of a woman, for he's not clean? Even the moon and the stars are nothing to him. That's nothing to God. How much less then must man be when he stands before God? And then Job responds to that. He says, what help are you are to the weak, given your wisdom and insight? In other words, you don't know what you're talking about, Bildad. And he goes on and he agrees with Bildad about the greatness of God and whether or not anybody could understand God. But in verse 14, his most profound statement that you're going to find in this area of the section of Job. All of these things, the greatness of God, are whispered. So who could ever stand behind or stand in front of or stand under the words that he thunders? Think about that for a minute. He lists all of the greatness of God, for he does that for almost 9 verses. And they said, if these are the things that are whispered about him, think what he could do when he thunders his words. So we see that some of this greatness is the fact that he hangs the earth on nothing. He wraps waters into the clouds. He obscures the face of the moon. He sets boundaries for light and darkness. And he quiets the sea with his power. If he can do that with a whisper, what could he do when he roars like thunder? I hope that you'll take a look at that. That's an incredible section of Scripture. And so that's chapter 26, verses, well, you want to start reading at verse 1. I'll start at verse 1 and go all the way through verse 14, but particularly pay attention to the greatness of God that's between verses 5 and 14. And then look at that summation under verse 14. You'll find the greatness of God in verse 7 and following. Well, Job is an interesting book, isn't it? Job doesn't have down pat what God is really like. Certainly, neither do any of the 3 visitors that have come to him. And Job clearly says, you guys are no help at all. You don't have any wisdom or insight that's worth anything. And Job understands the greatness of God. But just stop for a second when we think about application to life. 3 visitors come. 3 visitors have either been so influenced by Job or they themselves have a certain amount of faith in God. At least they have a theology about God and believe there is a God. Did Job influence them into believing that there is a God? I think so. I think these friends were influenced by Job and his righteousness. And after 7 days and 7 nights, they lose perspective and they start to flow out with their own theology about the wicked deserve what they get and they get punishment. And the righteous get what they deserve because nobody is righteous before God. So it's interesting, isn't it, the theology that people come up with. We're so fortunate today to have the Holy Scriptures, to know a lot more about the character and nature of God, and to be able to have sound theology. Do we sometimes disagree with each other on some of the finer points? Absolutely. Do we really understand the difference between free will, grace and faith, and predestination or foreknowledge? Do we really understand that nobody comes to God except that He called them, versus man having free will to accept or reject God? Do we know all the details about the book of Revelation and what all of the symbolism is there? Do we understand how close the final judgment of this earth and the great tribulation might be? Well, with Russia invading today, one has to wonder, are we approaching the time when somebody's going to get careless and hit the wrong button, and this whole world as we know it begins to go through its judgment? And that's when all of us that are premillennialists are going to be praying that we get lifted out before it all happens. Well, it's something to think about, isn't it? Am I worried about it? Not at all. You're not going to change what God's plan is, even if you do worry about it. And if you do worry about it, it means you don't really have a strong faith in what's waiting for us hereafter. Because I know that the place that's waiting for me is far better than the place I'm in today. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.